Welcome back to the Spector Creative channel. I'm your host, Scott Toy Guru Neitlich, longtime toy collector and longtime toy maker. And a lot of that toy maker time I spent managing the Masters of the Universe brand at Mattel, which is why I get a lot of questions about the Masters of the Universe brand here on the Spector Creative channel, and a lot of those have to do with Skeletor, and people wanting to know how he became Skeletor and how he became so evil. I know I can't really do a good Skeletor, but his origin has been told a few times, and there's been a few different takes on it, whether it's in the mini-comics or the DC comics or in the animation. And there's been a lot of questions about what made him, turn to the dark side. And most people know it's because he had his puppy dog taken away, and, once that happens, everyone's going to get upset. I mean, who wouldn't be mad? But there have been other takes on it too. In the original mini-comics from 1982, Skeletor is shown as being a being from another dimension who wants to lead his people, quote-unquote, into Eternia. And that's basically why we need to have the Masters of the Universe multiverse, because there are so many contradictory stories out there between Filmation, the original mini-comics, even the new Netflix show, that you basically have to accept everything as its own sort of universe. But by far, the most popular and the most sort of settled version of Skeletor's origin is that he was once Keldor, which was first put forth in the 1986-87 mini-comic, The Search for Keldor. So who is Keldor? Well, we've covered this a bit in previous videos, but as a quick refresh, this is Keldor. He is a half Gar, half Nuggle, and Nugla, or N-U-G-L-A, are that's the Caucasian skin, or the white skin characters from MOTU, the Gar, the blue skin. His entire origin's available. You can watch a video on it, linked here. It's actually one of the more popular videos on this channel. But to breeze through it quickly, his face gets burned off by acid, and he has to be healed. So this is done by Hordak, who, when he's magically healed by being combined with an extra-dimensional being named Demo Man, winds up saving his life, increasing his power, but it gives him a floating skull head. So he was not born with a skull head, as a lot of people depict in both humorous and, art, toys, other media. But yeah, this is not the way he was born. He was not born with a skull face, and he did not grow up as a kid being teased by the other kids in Eterno's palace because he was the only blue-skinned kid with a skull for a face. So that's not what happened. He got his skull much later on in life, as due to, magic. And he didn't grow up with He-Man. He-Man and him were not playmates. He's actually He-Man's uncle, and we'll get into that. But yeah, so they weren't, they weren't contemporaries. They're from two different generations, if you will. So Skeletor is the older generation, and He-Man, aka Prince Adam, is the younger generation. So if Skeletor wasn't born this way, then, well, where did he come from? And, all of that. I mean, obviously the skull isn't biologically his. His son wears a skull mask as a tribute to his father, but, he still has the Gar blue skin under the mask, and those pointy elf-esque ears. So, biologically he's a Gar, and he is also a part of the royal family. So to really understand Skeletor's childhood and who his parents are, we have to do a little Eternia royal history. So let's talk about Eternia kings real quick. Probably the most famous king of Eternia is Randor, because he was the king in Filmation. There's also, of course, King He-Man. When Adam grows up and disregards, Adam and becomes He-Man permanently, he eventually becomes king of Eternia. But again, that's a story for another time. There is also King Nero, that white-haired gentleman you see hugging Randor and here hugging Adora, one of his grandchildren. So Nero is Randor and Keldor's father. He was king before Randor. He was reimagined in the 2000 X series as much more of a warrior. In fact, he was just called Captain Nero, because the whole royal family thing was sort of reimagined a little bit for 2000 X. But for classics, we brought him back to being King Nero, because we were trying to combine, other aspects, such as Filmation, where he was a king. And there's never been an action figure of King Nero, despite the fact that he's one of the most important characters in the He-Man mythos. Because, well, I mean, he's He-Man and She-Ra's grandfather, and Randor and Keldor's father. He was king before Randor. So there's been a lot of customs over the years. Fans have definitely made figures of him, both in the classics line and what he might have looked like in the vintage, or what now might be thought of as the Origins line. Who knows? Maybe Origins will have him. I mean, he makes a cool old man action figure. We first really met him in Filmation's King Nero's Journey by J. Michael Straczynski, who wrote the story of Nero sort of sneaking into the palace as an old man and eventually reveals who he is, and He-Man go on a butt scooting race down the local hills to see who can scoot on his butt the fastest. And again, he was reimagined, as I noted, for the 2000X series as much more of a warrior and less of a butt scooter. Because, that's what 2000X did. It really took everything to the next level and, really made the characters more aggressive and more fun for kids. He was still kind of the whole, King Lear, old man with the crown, if you will. That motif still stood there, but in 2000X, he was a lot more of a warrior and less of a sort of just sneaky old man who disappeared. So he is, the king, and he has two sons. Son number 1 is Keldor, and son number 2 is Randor. You could see them both on the cover of this Masters of the Universe Classics mini-comic, where, they're in sort of their younger days. Randor is much more of a kid, hence no beard, and Keldor is, Keldor. So this is all confirmed, from Mattel. I mean, there's an official family tree that was put out for the 2000X series, but it does leave a mystery as for who the mothers are. So let's get into that, because that's one of the mysteries that's been part of Masters of the Universe for a long, long time. Now, fans have taken it upon themselves to kind of fill in the gaps, and some of them have created names for different characters, but let's get into the official ones, because there are official names that go with these. All right, so King Nero, we know who he is, and, he's got, again, that whole King Lear, old man keeping the crown on, but who is Skeletor's mother? And, obviously, he has blue skin, and this is where his blue skin comes from. His mother is a Gar. His father, King Nero, is a Nugla, N-U-G-L-A. That's, again, the name of the Caucasian race. The Gar are the blue race. You can learn more about the history of the Gar in this video here. So, I mean, it's not that complicated. Nero essentially falls in love with a Gar peasant woman named Kyla, K''Y''L''A. And, what can you say? When you meet an attractive blue-skinned female, you can fall in love with her. And a lot of the Gar saw this as a very positive thing because they had really been outcasts for a long time. And again, you can see the videos about the history of the Gar, but you can see also why King Nero, when she was out hunting, fell in love with this woman, and they were married, she became queen, and together they had a son named Keldor. So Keldor was mixed race. He was half Gar and half Nugla. So again, the Gar really saw this as a progressive thing. Until, unfortunately, Queen Kyla died. She died when Keldor was 5 years old, and wasn't there to raise him. Nero, of course, wanting to have a wife in his life, remarried, and he remarried rather quickly to Princess Malia. So Malia is Randor's second wife, and they had a son named Randor. Keldor, being the oldest, though, was heir to the throne. And, of course, not only was there some sibling rivalry, but Keldor very much saw his father remarrying so quickly as a little bit of a betrayal, kind of like in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. They play that off a little bit with Robin Hood and his brother, Will Scarlet. So there is a little bit of, conflict between the two brothers, but they do grow up together in the royal palace, and they both become captains in the royal army, and they fight together for the defense of Eternia and Eternos, and for good, if you will. Keldor was once, a knight fighting for, his family, for, to keep back the bad guys. And one of those bad guys was Marzo, who led an army of shadow beasts against Eternos Palace in a conflict known as the Great Unrest. So this was a war that took place about 25 years before Prince Adam and Princess Adora were born, And during this conflict, Marzo, you can see on the left, opened up a portal to Despondos and threw Nero into it. So Nero was lost and assumed dead, assumed gone forever. And this was very traumatic for both Keldor and Randor, watching their father be essentially thrown from Eternia into this horrible dimension that they'd heard about, from nightmare stories growing up. Despondos was the place. It was basically like hell, if you will. It was a horrible place. So I won't go into the whole things about Keldor's origin because it's covered elsewhere, but essentially Randor's mother is killed and Keldor is blamed for it. There was definitely some pulling of strings, shall we say, from Hordak. You can see on the cover of the 4th mini-comic that tells this story, you see Hordak sort of controlling events on a chessboard, grabbing Keldor and pushing back Randor and Nero. So this is to indicate that, yes, Hordak was, manipulating events. Now, Randor is forced to banish Keldor to save his life because the crowd of people want his blood. They're basically like, he just killed the queen. Whether he did or, it was Hordak forcing his hand, it's still a little mysterious, and it's meant to be. But the point is that in order to save Keldor's life from the mob of people, he was forced to banish him, Randor was. So Randor was saving Keldor's life, but that's not the way Keldor saw it. Keldor saw it as Randor stealing his birthright. So he sought out great power for his revenge and found Hordak, or at least Hordak's temple, where Hordak could communicate with him through his interdimensional prison. Hordak is also in Despondos. Everyone seems to wind up in Despondos. And he trains Keldor in the dark arts and to use magic and how to acquire a staff to become even more powerful. And again, this is all covered in the Origin of Skeletor video, but I wanted to, add much more about his childhood here because that's what gets asked about. Eventually, Keldor and Randor have their great battle in the Hall of Wisdom. This can be seen in the 2000X series pilot in the first episode. Keldor is mortally wounded, as discussed earlier in the video, with an acid vial that he intends to burn his brother with, falls back on his face. He goes to his dark arts master Hordak, who combines him with an extra-dimensional being named Demo Man, and this both saves his life, because his face is burning off, and it increases his power and forces him to now have a skull face. And that is really how Skeletor, becomes Skeletor, and loses his puppy and becomes evil. And we all know that, that's the best way to really turn someone into a supervillain, is by burning their face off and taking their puppy away. Now, the story of Randor and Nero isn't over at this point. Randor eventually finds his father in Despondos and they return to Eternia, but that's a whole other story and a YouTube video for another time. But Skeletor is now fully powered up and constantly seeking upgrades because he now wants to take Eternia back because he was first born, and he feels that Randor and his family have taken it from him. So when he says, Eternia should be mine, it should be, because, he wasn't, born evil. He was firstborn, and, his right to the throne is kind of valid. That's what makes a great villain, a villain who actually has sort of a legitimate cause, and it's, really just that they're doing it maybe in a bad way, because he doesn't, care about the people, whoever gets in his way, he just wants that throne. I hope this enlightened some of the missing details about Skeletor's childhood and his mother and how he and Randor are related as half-brothers. If you like this video, do share it with others, and let me know in the comments below what you think. I always answer every question. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.